Today we are jumping into the climax of our percent unit. This is the last real-life application of percents that we're going to jump into. And this is a big one, and maybe one that you may not have had much experience with yet at this point in your life, but someday you are really going to need to know and understand this topic of interest. So today we are talking about something called simple interest. There are lots of other types of interest that are calculated. There's compound interest and other things, but today we are really just talking, and the focus of this piece is simple interest. That's the only application that we're going to discuss here in 7th grade. And what simple interest is it's interest that's calculated on the principal amount or your principal balance. And that might be a lot of words that we don't know yet, and so we're going to kind of break them apart. But it's interest that's calculated on the principal balance. And as you go through this application piece, you're going to run into two different scenarios in which interest is accrued. Maybe when you go and you have a bank account, you have interest growing on your bank account. You put money in the bank, and it's almost like a thank you that the bank gives you, and they give you just a small little percentage of the money that you're holding in the bank, and it grows. And so if you have money in a bank, and there's different interest rates you can put them in savings accounts where your money is going to grow, and you're not doing anything. You don't even have to put more money in there, but what interest does is it takes a percentage of what you have in there and it grows your money. The other type of interest that is maybe not so good is interest that grows when you have a loan out. And so you guys know that I just bought a house recently, and even when I bought my car, I had to borrow money in order to make that happen. And so there is interest growing on that loan amount, which means that I have to pay back more money than I initially borrowed. So in that case, it's not necessarily a good thing, and people don't want a high interest rate, and they don't want those loans for very long because it's growing, and that means you're paying more. And so you're going to see maybe in some of these questions just the difference between the two, and how in one case it's good and we like the interest, and in the other case it's bad and it means that we're paying more money. But the good news is that in order to calculate simple interest, there's a formula, and it's a mathematical equation that we use to calculate the amount of interest that you've earned. You do not have to memorize this. You will be given it, but it's really quite simple. There's just 4 letters in this, and you need to know certain pieces of information in order to make it happen. So the formula we're going to use is I, which stands for interest, equals P times R times T. And all of those letters stand for something different. And we're going to dive into that piece down here where it says, what do all the letters mean? We need to know what these letters mean and what they signify in order to be able to plug them in correctly. So the I simply stands for the interest that you're earning. That's what you're trying to find. And that's why that's on the one side of the equal sign by itself. Usually you don't know that number, but you know the P, the R, and the T. And so you just have to multiply them together to determine the amount of interest you earn. It's important that you know that when you calculate this, you are just finding the interest. You may have some extra steps needed based on what the question's asking. P stands for your principal, which is what we wrote earlier up top. Principal is just the original amount of money that you either paid, if it was a loan, that you borrowed, or that you put into your bank account. So it's talking about money, principal, and I'll even put that $sign here. When you see that in the problem, any money amount is your principal. It's the original amount. The R is standing for the interest rate. So that's going to be a percentage. That will be your clue. It's what percent is your money growing at. And then finally, the T stands for time. And the really important piece about this is that this is measured in years. And so if you're given a problem and the time is not in years, maybe it's just in months, it must be put into years in order for this formula to work. So I'm going to walk through an example with you of how this might look. This is just one example, but again, there are several others, and we're going to decide whether this is the good type of interest or maybe this is the bad type of interest. So here's our problem. It says to find the amount of interest earned on a $450 deposit. There's our money amount, that's our principal amount. that was left in an account for 7 years, there's our time, with a 2% interest rate. So just based on the context clues of this problem, we had money that was left in an account, which means that this money is growing. This is good interest because our money is growing over time even though we didn't put any extra money in there. So this is just going to walk us through the pieces of information that we need. The initial deposit was $450. That's how much money was put into the account. Then we didn't touch it. And it grew here at the interest rate of 2%. And like our percent applications unit, before we can do anything, before we can multiply with that percentage, we need to turn it into a decimal. Don't be fooled. 2% as a decimal is 0.02. Add that extra 0 in there. And then we left it, the time that we're looking at, we left it in our account for 7 years. So we didn't do anything. $450 went in, and we just let it sit for 7 years, growing at a 2% interest rate. So we're going to plug in all those numbers into our equation to help us solve this problem. And again, we know that I, which is what we're trying to find, interest, equals P, which is my $450, times R, which is my interest rate, 0.02, times time in years, which is my 7. So really, I'm just taking these 3 numbers I was given, multiplying them together. I want you to do that in your calculator and see what you get. The amount of interest earned, I got a total of $63 after 7 years. And you might say, well, that's not really a lot of money, Mrs. Reiner. $63, that's not very much. But again, you didn't do anything. You just had to deposit $450 in, and you didn't touch it, and you just made $63 after 7 years. So because this is the good interest, we just let our money sit here. We need to find our new total. We started with $450, and it says in order to find the new total, we need to add the amount of interest to our original deposit. This is the new total amount in the account. So we had $450. Our interest grew our money by $63. So now we have $513 in our account. So cool how that happens, and that's just one of the benefits of interest. You're growing and gaining money as time goes on. Again, if this was the bad type of interest and maybe we borrowed $450 to buy something, that $63 is extra money that we have to pay back. So again, we'll add it here, but it means that we borrowed $450, but now we have to pay whoever we borrowed it from $513 back. So that just gives you an idea of what the bad type of interest looks like. This we're happy about because we just got free money. But if it was a loan, it's not as exciting. It's got some consequences and strings attached. So I want you to just practice this equation. On the back of this page of notes, you're going to see a bunch of different examples. It's a big table, and they give you the principal, the interest rate, and the time. And I just want to see you write out these equations and find the amount of interest. And then again, in the next column, it's asking for the new total. So the new total would be taking that interest amount and adding it to your principal amount like we just did here to figure out how much money you now have. Once you finish the back of that page, you can check in with me and get you your next assignment.